Hello and welcome back to the Red Path. Today I'm going to go over some basic tips to help you out when deploying your World Eaters and to hopefully help you score a few more points on the secondary. And that's coming up next. Okay, welcome back to the Red Path. So, like I said, today we're going to go over some basic tips on how you can think about deploying your World Eaters with an eye for scoring a few more of those tasty secondary points. So, on the screen now, you'll see a very basic force of some basically action monkey units, I guess we'll call them. Not necessarily, because there are some 8-bound and berserkers in there, but things like your spawn and jackals and even your rhino are typically units that you will use to try and score you points or to assist other units in scoring points. For instance, the rhino as a transport or as something that's going to eat Overwatch, and so on and so forth. So what we're going to start off with is looking at 7 or 8 of the secondaries that you can draw in turn 1 and can score turn 1 relatively easily if you have deployed in the correct way. I've shot myself in the foot a couple of times by not deploying in such a way where I could score some of these, and have since researched it and kind of come up with a general plan. So obviously it will be different based on the list you're running, but you're definitely going to want to be including some action units in your army. I personally like spawn and jackals, but you will find you'll just have to use the tools you have available. Sometimes you'll be using Angron to score points, sometimes you'll be using spawn. It just depends on what the game dictates at that time. So to start with, let's have a little look. So like I said, we've got some jackals, spawn, rhino, berserkers and some 8-bound. We've got a table set up here on a hammer and anvil deployment, and I'm going to briefly go over the secondaries which are very much scoreable for us in turn 1. There are some problem secondaries, especially going first. Assassinate, bring it down, no prisoners can be challenging if your opponent has correctly screened you, even with a turn 1 charge from Angron or 8-bound or whoever you have able to get over there. If they've screened you out and hidden their characters, or they don't have any tanks or anything, it can be a bit of a challenge, and those are things you're typically going to want to discard, use the New Order stratagem to discard and hopefully get one of these secondaries I'm about to go over. So the first one we're going to start with is Area Denial. So Area Denial is get a unit wholly within 6 of the center, and hopefully there's no enemies there, otherwise you've got to kill them. Otherwise, if you can be with no enemies within 3 of the center, and you are wholly within 6, you'll score 3 instead of the 5. This is a really solid one. It's quite a good one to come up first for us, because we do have units that can move pretty fast, and scout move and things like that. And with the +2 to move blessing, most of our army can achieve this. So that's a good one. And it couples very well with Deploy Teleport Homer, which is basically do an action in the center of the board or in the enemy deployment zone. It's going to be very, very tricky, if not impossible, quite frankly, to do this in the enemy deployment turn 1, but you can very easily get the 3 victory points for doing it in the center. Then we go into Cleanse, which is basically do an action on objectives in no man's land. So on this, we've got 1, 2, 3 objectives that we could cleanse. Then we go to Secure No Man's Land, which is control 2 or more objective markers in no man's land. Attempt and target. Your opponent will pick one of the no man's land objectives and you will have to take it. Extend battle lines. If you control 1 or more objective markers in your deployment zone, so hold your home base, and control 1 or more in no man's land, you get 5. It's pretty good. Investigate signals is basically do an action in the 4 corners of the battlefield wholly within 9 inches. Maybe hard to see on the screen, but I've got a pink line here which is showing the 9-inch area. And finally, we've got engage on all fronts. Be in 3 or 4 corners of the battlefield outside of essentially 3 inches away from another quadrant. There is a handy tool we can put here which shows that, but when I go over it in detail, I'll use that. Okay, so a couple of things I want to bring up before I actually show you my thoughts on deployment. Obviously, I set these up in such a way where they stack quite nicely. You can only ever have 2 active secondaries. There is a mission, Secret Intelligence, I think it's called, or Secret Intel, something like that, where you draw 3 and discard 1, and obviously you have the New Order stratagem once a game to discard 1, and at the end of your turn you can discard 1 you didn't score to gain a CP. But you'll only ever have at most 2 in play that you could score from. Most of these kind of combo well with each other, so if you draw 2 of these in your first turn, and you're going first especially, you're going to score pretty well, or you should be able to score pretty well. For instance, Area Denial is get in the middle, and Deploy Teleport Homers is get in the middle. You'll get 8 for doing those 2. Cleanse, do actions on at least 2 objectives to get 5 victory points, and Secure No Man's Land, control 2 or more objectives in No Man's Land. So you see, there's some nice synergy there. Something very important to note, especially on this mission or missions that have an objective in the center. If you was to draw Deploy Teleport Homer and Cleanse, these are what we typically know as actions, and everyone still calls them actions, but there is nowhere in the rules, at least that I could find, and correct me if I'm wrong, because it does happen, that 1 unit can do 2 actions. So you could move 1 unit onto this central objective, and it could deploy the Teleport Homer, and it could also cleanse. And then you could have another guy come up here and cleanse that one, and you'll get everything. I've read through the core rules, and because there isn't a section on actions, because actions technically don't exist, it's just a unit that is eligible to shoot, so basically, for us at least, hasn't fallen back or advanced. It can do these things, and you can stack them up. Anyway, so we don't know what secondaries we're going to draw. We don't know what secondaries we're going to draw until after we've got our blessings. So 99% of the time, when you get your blessings, you do know who's going first, but that would change the thing. If you're going second, it's going to be a while. You're going to have to weather a storm, a turn of shooting, stuff like that. But if you are going first, you'll draw your blessings before you get your secondaries. What I strongly recommend turn 1, unless it's like your opponent has infiltrated, or it's search and destroy, or something like that. You know, there are exceptions to every rule, but typically +2 move and the 6-up Feel No Pain are just a great start. Now, if you're definitely going to get in combat with several units in your army turn 1, yes, of course, go for sustained, because if you kill the enemy quicker than they can kill you, you're going to have a much better opportunity at scoring later in the game. But we are trying to maximize the kind of take all comers, prepared for any situation, using our cheaper non-combat units, and we do want to score consistently in every round, and also position for, you know, primary scoring and things like that. So we are going to assume the first round will be fairly non-interactive. Okay, let's just assume that. It doesn't always happen, but we're assuming. So no matter what we draw, hopefully we'll get 1 or 2 of these. So we're going to deploy with that in mind. So I'm going to use this army over here and kind of give some tips. So the first thing to do, another deployment tip, is always put your shitty chaff units up first, so you're not giving away like what flank you're going to throw Angron down, or what firing lanes you're going to try and avoid, and things like that. So spawn are just a great thing to throw down first. I would put, if you have 3 units, of course you may not be running 3, but 1 or 2 is pretty solid. I would stick them something like this on the flanks, because with the +2 move they'll have 10 inches of movement. And the reason I'm putting them here is, first off, turn 1, if I've got investigate signals, they can move 10 inches. They would probably deploy hard on the flank then, like that. If they move 10 inches back here, they get into the 9 inches, investigate signals, bam. Do the same on this side with blue squad. They'll get here. Obviously, I'd position better in a real game. But there we go. There's 4 victory points sorted. If I don't get investigate signals, but let's say I get a cleanse, which would be, so incredibly possible. Our 10-inch movement, because again, we've chosen our +2 move. We would just move them 8.5 inches or so up there, and then similarly on this flank, maybe push a bit deeper here because the terrain is a bit more forgiving. But, we're going something like that, You would, of course, want to bear in mind any lines of sight you can get blocked. Okay, that one. I don't know if these guys would have the ability to move in there. I'm not sure. I suppose we could check. So if we put 1 here, 1 here. He can get, with 10 inches of movement, he can get in there. Could he? No. So depending on the terrain setup, you've kind of got to make a bit of a sacrifice, but getting a guy there to cleanse for you, and he can just sit behind, maybe whatever. You make that choice yourself, because obviously terrain is going to be different on every single table. Even if it's a generic layout like this, measurements will be slightly different. Anyway, so there we go, our 2 spawn, which start pretty hard on the flanks. I'd say about an inch off the table edge, like that. That gives you investigate as an option. It gives you cleanse, and there was a couple others. I think it's secure no man's land. That it'll get you that. Potentially a tempting target, depending on what they pick. Extend battle lines. That's a lot of secondaries immediately covered by 2 relatively cheap units sitting on the flanks. Another thing we might want to do is put a rhino. I think this will probably be the best position if he legally fits there. Okay, let's say he does. Okay, so a problem with engage on all fronts is if you get it turn 1, we don't have that many units which can score it. However, if you disembark berserkers from a rhino turn 1, let's put up his... Okay, I'm going to have to cheat here. Put him flat. So like that. Something like that. So they'll get their 3-inch disembark. Something like that. Then we can use the auto advance of 6, and with +2 movement, that's going to be they get an additional 14 inches. So let's put up our engage on all fronts. So basically they have to get into this quadrant, and they've currently got 14 additional inches of movement, which puts them easily in that quadrant. And assuming they don't die to Overwatch or something like that, I'm not saying this is what you automatically want to do, but it is an option. You may be able to use cover and things like that a lot better there, but scoring 3 victory points is definitely worth it. The Rhino itself, you have to have a very straight pathway. Let's replace these spawn with the Rhino. So if you put the Rhino sideways, which you'd have to do to hope. So a Rhino has 12 base movement. You give it +2 from the blessings for 14, and if you advanced him an auto 6, he would just make it. So he's got 20 inches of movement. So 20 inches puts him over there. I think you can go back an inch. Yep. So you need 19 or 20 inches of movement, which if you roll the advance, it's 5 or 6. If you get a 4 or less, he's not going to be wholly outside, so he won't score you the engage points. So the Rhino's a bit more of a risk, but putting him in that kind of central position here, something like that. If you don't go first and the Rhino gets blown up, well, the Berserkers can disembark behind cover there. Or if you have another secondary you want to get, it's area denial, something like that, you've got that. You've got options there. So we have the Berserkers in the Rhino, and we'll stick the Rhino something like that. I would always deploy Jackals on my home objective. Depending on how much is in Deep Strike, I may string them out along my backfield, just towing the home objective. Or if there's nothing in Deep Strike and I'm allowed to be quite aggressive in the game, they're going to be just touching it. The reason for that is I'm not too concerned about getting them full cover, because they'll sticky that in my first turn at the end of the command phase. Annoyingly, this is before you roll the blessings, so you can't use an icon's reroll in your very first blessings, but going forward, if they're touching an objective, you would. Anyway, so at the end of my first command phase, they're going to sticky that objective. If I go second and my opponent wants to shoot them off there, which would be fair if I've left them quite vulnerable, I just pop the CP to sticky that objective. Job's done. Easy. So either way, you're going to have a sticky objective. Whether that is something you still have to protect from deep striking units will be dependent on the game. But Jackals are typically something you want to stick on your objective, whether defensively to screen out the backfield, or offensively where they're just towing it, and maybe the front line, the first rank is front line, so they can get an advance turn 1 and maybe try and sticky the center as well. That will be game dependent. But at the moment, we are currently set up. We can do area denial was the next one. Let's do that. So 8 bound, I know they're not great. I recognise that. They're overcosted, they're not quite as killy as they should be. They've got a lot of problems going for them, but I am trying to use them again. I'm going to give them some reps and see if I can use them purely for the scoring game, because they do have a scout move of 6, which, coupled with this Rhino and Berserkers over there, the scout move of 6 puts them, something like that. Then they've got 9 inch, but it goes to 11 inches of movement in the game, which, okay, something must have gone wrong there, because they do clear it. Okay, yeah, it's probably because of the terrain, but obviously you would micro this. So the 6 plus 11 for 17 should clear them. Let's do it properly. Let's just test and make sure, because I did test this beforehand, but obviously rehearsal's not the same as the night. So here we go. We've got 17 inches of movement. Puts them, oh yeah, very clearly. Yep, so they absolutely would be able to score you engage as well. Something else they can do, let's get rid of engage and put area denial. So in that position, kind of like on the flank, but not too extreme, with their 6 inches of movement, turn 1, something like that, assuming you're going first, so you can be quite aggressive with them. And then, 11 inches puts them wholly within the middle, capping that objective. Or you can use them to push up a flank if you've got a cleanse up here, or on some of the other deployments. Let's, what is it called? Sweeping, not Dawn of War, sweeping engagement, that's it. I was stuck that objective there. But they would be able to, move over here, and what's the other one? Crucible of Battle. Yeah, and there's some objectives, especially when you move or you split the central objective, you'll get no man's land that's quite far away, and you want to move there. Okay, so we're not going into combat patrol. Hammer and Anvil, there we go. So yeah, so 8 bound and a Rhino kind of mirror each other off center. Those are my reserve Berserkers, which are in the Rhino. And the third spawn would be if you have them, somewhere in the center. Because if you need to use the Jackals to screen your back line, if they've got to come out and sort of spread out, sort of covering something like that, obviously not like that, you could run the spawn, I know you'd need a bit of an healthy advance on them, but they are just another utility piece, or you need them to come back and hold your objective because you're worried your opponent has the deep strike and you need to use the Jackals to clean out. Anyway, so let's go over these objectives. Area denial, we can 100% do with 8 bound, potentially Jackals, the Berserkers from the Rhino, the third unit of spawn. Easy, we've got several options. Deploy Teleport Homer. Same units that would do area denial, as long as they don't have to advance, would be able, as long as they can get wholly within 6 of the centre. So we've got 2 out of 7 so far. Cleanse, our spawn on the sides. Now the only issue would be is if we do Cleanse and Investigate Signals, we're going to be sacrificing something. Cleanse is worth 5, Signals would only be worth 4, but maybe we would send the third unit of spawn up to the middle and the 8 bound up to one other side and just get as much as we can. We could probably get 7 points easily, 9 quite possibly. Secure no man's land, absolutely. 2 in the middle. We've easily got this between the spawn and the Berserkers, the Rhino, the 8 bound, easy. Tempting target, we have options to get on each of these objectives with a unit. Extend battle lines, again, we can get something in no man's land, and we control one in our own deployment zone. Easy peasy. Investigate Signals, we'll get 4 points. Investigate Signals is a tricky one because it is worth up to 8, which is, really good. These can be game swinging objectives. There's 2 or 3 that you can score 8 off of. How it is very difficult. I've had it come up a couple times where I've got 6, but 4 is, you take 4 points every day of the week. And just maintaining a couple of units in your backfield, or having reserves that can come on and do it that you don't feel bad about, just to make sure when it does come up you can score 4 points, can be pretty clutch. Of course, the earlier it happens the better, because you want your spawn to be able to move forwards, or whatever. If you're using a Rhino back there or even Berserkers, you want them to do the action and then get back into the thick of it and start scoring you primary points instead. But it is, it is victory points, and you want to chase them wherever you can. And then finally, engage on all fronts. We could, in theory, score the 5 points in turn 1 between the Berserkers and the Rhino, getting an auto advance, and then the 8 bound coming out. Now, you would have to choose if it was worth it, because you are potentially sacrificing both of those units, and especially the Berserkers with the advance, because you may have picked advance and charge, so they'll be all right. But you will typically have chaff units to charge into, guardsmen, gaunts, things like that. So you're not going to feel bad about throwing the 8 bound, as long as you remember to keep them after the pile in and consolidate in that quadrant of the battlefield, because I have robbed myself of victory points so many times by consolidating and then not being wholly within that part of the battlefield, because you just often don't think about it. But if they end up somewhere here and there is a charge target here and they make it, I'm just going to make sure I don't get greedy and try and consolidate over here and then screw myself out points. But that's just something to remember. So, okay, let's just kind of quickly review the positioning. Let's turn those off. Spawn on the flanks, about an inch from the edge of the deployment line. Obviously, that will depend on where the objectives are and where your deployment zone is. Things like 8 bound or rhinos with berserkers on the near side of the flanks, and then jackals and like a utility unit like Spawn in the middle. Where you put the rest of your army, which will predominantly be your actual killy stuff, whether it's Angron, Terminators, Exalted 8 bound, Demon allies, what have you, you'll be sticking them, more protected, more so they're using the line of sight blocking terrain, or obscuring, whatever the hell we call it now, to be protected and actually stage and position. If everything goes off in a perfect plan, all the units that you throw forward, let's say you get Cleanse and Secure No Man's Land turn 1, you'll have some Spawn, which, in your second turn can go forward and keep working on their screens, whilst your heavy hitters keep pushing up into better positions for that go turn when it eventually hits, typically turn 3, depending on the map, depending on advance and charge, and things like that. Okay. So I hope that's giving you some things to think about. Obviously, this isn't a guaranteed path to victory. This may not cooperate with how you like to run your list. Maybe you don't own Spawn. Maybe you hate Spawn. I like them, but, they're not for everybody. Maybe you don't run Rhinos. Maybe you absolutely hate 8 bound. I don't know. But you can find something, presumably, that you do like and do run to fill a similar role. You could use the Skull Crushers, I don't know, the Khorne Juggernauts. You could use them in place of Spawn. They're tougher, a bit more expensive, obviously, about twice the price, but they'll take a lot more damage as well. You've got options. Just think about where you can position things where they can score you points in the first turn, assuming you're going first, so you're not worried about using Angron to get you area denial or things like that. Okay, hopefully that helps, and if you've enjoyed this content, please consider liking and subscribing, blah 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 blah. Join us in the Discord if you want some more of these super high level competitive tips. We do have a Patreon with a private Discord channel where we talk about stuff like this and kind of theorize it. There's no paywalled content in there, but it is, or no paywalled video content at least. Obviously, our discussions are locked for those who support us. But yeah, thanks for watching. Let us know in the comments if you've got any other suggestions to help with deployment. But until next time, folks, stay healthy, stay safe, and kill main bam.